So the internet is a hall of mirrors. They make me put this up. I'm assuming everyone has read it now. Thank you. There will be a test later. So who am I? I have a PhD in theoretical mathematics. My field is algebraic topology and Nielsen theory. And if there's anyone here who knows what I just said, no? Okay. I have 10 years of hands-on experience in computer networking and security. I spent most of my time at a startup, which actually did hit the IPO stage and is still going, I think. Currently, I'm a researcher at CERT. I've been there almost 9 years now. I am the co-editor-in-chief of a new journal called ACM Digital Threats Research and Practice. And we want your papers. We have a new paper type we're calling a field note, which is a short 1,000 to 1,500 word paper that we hope practitioners will be able to send to us because we really want to bridge the gap between researchers and practitioners. I'm also the primary author on a book on cybersecurity and applied mathematics. Yes, there are integrals in the book. No, there will not be integrals in this talk. But I cannot promise there won't be math in this talk. And I'm also a co-author on a book, The Science of Cybersecurity, which is in preparation. What? I want to say hopefully this year, but it depends on my co-author. I've basically written my part. I mean, I've done all I can to get my co-author going, but his wife just had a baby, so there's a baby delay in there. There's a baby delay involved. So I'm going to talk graph analysis. So this is back a plug to my book. There's actually a chapter on graph theory. There's even a chapter on game theory. This is also not a book, by the way, on lots of proofs, because I know as a mathematician, I love proofs. As non-mathematicians, you go, please God, no. So, but graphs have been used a lot in DNS analysis and in any kind of internet analysis. I had an intern who did DNS analysis for me using graphs. And we ended up hiring him. He's an awesome kid. But in this talk, I'm going to use routing as my example. I originally gave a variation of this talk at the Joint Mathematics Conference last year. So there's a little more math probably than you're hopefully expecting. And I also had to explain to them what BGP routing is. And this is important to me because I actually just read a paper. Okay, I didn't finish reading the paper, but the paper informed me that because paths are shorter in the Tor network, that it's a lot faster to get through the Tor network than it is to get through the internet routing. And I'm like, wait a minute, dudes. You're missing a very big point that could go from IP to IP in the Tor network. You actually have to do the BGP thing. It's a rather important step. And since that kind of pissed me off, I didn't finish reading the paper. But it's understandable. I mean, seriously, that is a misunderstanding and a very bad assumption made. And I was actually asked recently to describe my job, and I went, I do things with math and stuff. But at the core, what I work on is I work on the assumptions that people make in cybersecurity. I don't actually like assumptions as a mathematician. As a mathematician, we do use assumptions. You read a proof and you'll see assume that. And you're going, Leigh, you're saying you don't like assumptions, and you say this all the time. But assumptions in math are well defined. And we can tell you exactly and prove exactly why those assumptions are needed. Cybersecurity, there's a lot of, well, it kind of worked like that at my company, so I'm going to assume it's like that every company I've ever seen. And I go, yeah, no. Because that's what I do. So I assume pairing direction relationships are bidirectional because I want a nice undirected graph. I want both directions to count in graph theory, not one way or the other. And so this data is actually also available. That's one of the great things about studying BGP is there is data out there. There's tons of data out there. So there's the RouteViews project, University of Oregon. There is the Write project, and then we have both available at mirrorsrouteviews.cert.org. I will tell you that to get the paths available at the CERT project, you're going to have to install Silk. Silk being the network monitoring tool that CERT wrote and still writes. It's because they put them in a format called a PMAP, which makes it very fast to access them. So the point here, though, is that when I look at the route views, there's 100,000, 116,000 edges, 59,000 vertices, and a bunch of cycles. This is the minimal cycle that can happen in this graph. That's what I'm counting. We can build other cycles from these other cycles. And I've lost everyone. Okay. But in right, there's a lot more edges. And there's a different number of vertices. That's because in Europe, they see things differently than we see things in the US. And actually, route views is not just the US centric. They also have something in Sydney, and they have something in, I want to say Singapore, and there's also something in South America. So it's a pretty good view of this side of the world. But when we look at the route view right side of it, it's a bit different. And if we put it all together for a gigantic view, it's not exactly a union thing going on. So everyone sees the world a little different when you're looking at routing. So the next thing I looked at was the regionality of the internet. So a bogon network is a network that should not be announced. This is like private IP space. This is, yes, there are still a few networks that are not assigned to anyone. We're not totally exhausted and assigned everything to everybody yet. And these still things get announced. Now, I will tell you, there is a tool that I wrote. Routing is one of these topics that keeps coming around to me like every 4 or 5 years. It comes back and they want me to look at it again, and then it's not so hot, and then it comes back. And right now we have route injections, and they're very scary. And even though I did work on them about 4 years ago, they're back again. So the tool is called BG Puma, or Border Gateway Protocol Update Metric Analysis. I did not name it. I did not backronym it. I just wrote the tool. The tool is nice, though, because you can give it a list of networks. Like you want to know who else is announcing your own networks. You can give it a list, and it will use the Silk tool set in order to quickly go through the data that's available at route views or write, as long as you download the files, and tell you who's announcing those. Either the superset or the subset. It will find all of that. And it's fast, too, because Silk is really fast. So this is a network is assigned to AFNIC. But it hasn't been assigned to an organization yet. There's a list of bogons that is available from abuse.ch, and it shows up in there. And I went looking for it because I had the bogon list for V4, and I said, who's announcing these? And then you kind of have to throw out private IP space from that list because freaking everyone announces private IP space for some reason. I actually remember an event many years ago when I was working at the startup where Sprint decided to announce part of 10 dot, and it took everything offline. It was lots of fun. Thank God at the time I was not dealing with the networks directly. I could just sit back and laugh. So anyway, there's an Indonesian ISP that says, hey, this is mine. I'm announcing this. The thing is, I can't reach it from my network. This is my home box sitting in my office. By the way, hi, my name is Leigh. I have a data hoarding problem. I have 60 terabytes of space in my office because I can't get rid of anything. And the reason it's sitting in my office is because I crashed all the systems that people use for central development too many times, and they won't let me use them anymore. Everyone has a hobby. On the other hand, this is an Indonesian ping. I can get there. Oops. I also can't get there from, I think this is Budapest. Because I'm like, well, maybe it's just, my network, because I'm sitting behind firewalls and all kinds of other things, and who knows, they may not want me to ping these places. So I went and said, hey, what does Budapest do? I can't reach it either. And this is not the only case I found. I actually found a case of a Chilean ISP announcing part of level 3. And they were announcing 4.4.4.0/24, and they were doing it last year, but they've stopped, so I'm assuming level 3 figured it out and, had words. And it was accessible within Chile. It was not accessible anywhere else, but it was accessible within Chile. They'd apparently decided, for whatever reason, we want 4. I don't know. They said they wanted it. Now, just in case, I like to tell people what tools I used and what data I used, in case for basically openness, except for later when I won't tell you anything. I'm not allowed to tell that part. But this part, I use looking glass servers to figure out who sees what. So what does this mean for defense? So going back to Jono and his talk yesterday, building general models about defense is hard, but possible if we are careful about understanding plurality of behaviors and models. Because I actually gave this talk at JMM because I was really tired of reading yet another paper about how the internet was modeled. And without the understanding of, yeah, that's your view of the internet and how that was modeled. I actually asked a statistician once because in my view, the internet is the greatest convenience sample ever. What you see is your convenience sample. So I said, how can you tell a convenience sample is representative of the entire thing? And I got the scratching of the head and the, well, and apparently that's a dissertation level question. And since I am a mathematician, not a statistician, I just walked away from that question. I don't do stats very well. Stats uses numbers, mathematicians don't. I'm actually notorious for misadding 1 and 1 when I was in graduate school. I don't do numbers. So I'm going to switch my topic from routing to blacklists because I had the theory based on this first part that affects the second part. And I've spent 6 years studying blacklists. We did blacklist reports from 2012 to 2017, both IP lists and domain lists. And they are all available from the SCI Digital Library. And why am I saying SCI instead of CERT? CERT is part of the Software Engineering Institute, which is part of Carnegie Mellon. The first one was actually entitled Everything You Wanted to Know About Blacklists But Were Afraid to Ask. I titled that as a joke. I'm serious. I didn't expect it to actually make it out with that title. Rich approved it, so we can blame Rich back there. I didn't actually expect it to get past technical writing. I was just like, I'm tired of working on this report. This report is 300 pages. About 12 of that is actual text. There are 288 pages of tables that basically back up those 12 pages of text. It is a great way to cure insomnia. So, this is the most recent one from the last half of 2017. And if you're going to say, Leigh, why aren't you doing this anymore? I think the horse is dead. I did it for 6 years. There's a point after doing it for 6 years and not ever getting a different result where you're kind of like, I don't think there's anything else here to say. Now in 10 years we may go back and say, okay, maybe there's something to say again, but right now I'm pretty sure the horse is dead. And the reason I did domains on this thing instead of IP addresses is I had a lot more IP lists than domain lists. Now the next question that I actually get asked is what are these lists? And that's the point where I'm saying, I can't tell you. That becomes because we figured out that people will turn it into a discussion about, well, my list is not exactly that. How did you get that information? And I can't tell them that either. So, I'm sorry I can't actually tell you what lists I'm looking at. They are obfuscated in all the reports. Sorry. But I can tell you that, look, they don't agree. This number of domains appears in only one list, and that's 97%, almost 98% of all the lists. There's just no intersection on these lists. Now, this is not just open source lists, just FYI. Someone assumed that that was what I was doing. No, this is not just open source lists. I acquire lists in various ways. And one of the things you never tell me is you can't do that because I'll figure out a way to do it. I also program, so I figured out ways to make this happen. Nobody reports the same as anything else. And there we go. You don't have to read all those 6 years of documents. I've just summarized the whole thing. Ta-da! Hey, they like it, the fact that I summarized. That's awesome. I don't have to summarize anymore. I'm done. Okay. No. There's also the fact that these lists are created for different things. Okay? I know one list is definitely for malware. Then again, another list is probably most likely for spam. I'm comparing them anyway because, well, they were lists. We also believe that each list is affected by each provider's view of the internet. It is one of these days I'm going to figure out how to prove that. It is my assumption right now that that is true. I mean, I'd like to be able to prove it. I don't know. While some blacklists are created by volunteers who submit data, those are the smaller lists. I actually tell people when they're talking about lists, I'm like, yeah, the smaller lists, they're probably pretty good because more than one eye has looked at those things before they're submitted. Someone once told me, and I don't have a list, by the way, he was a completely different country, that they keep a very small blacklist and it's audited like 3 people have to agree it's bad before it gets on a list. So I'd say that the smaller lists, and those are pretty good. You also have lists that are absolutely generated by whatever automated process. They're secret sauce. Whoever said I don't like secret sauce, yeah, I like you. So if my view of the internet shows A is malicious, while your view of the internet shows that B is malicious, we would assume that A intersect B is 0. Not necessarily. And there's another document we did on this. We did flog blacklists quite a bit. We actually have another presentation on blacklists and DGAs we're doing next month. But it's not the case. Good defense requires that the blacklist of you have is from the same view of the internet that you have, which we pretty much know isn't possible. So instead, buy all the blacklists. Okay, I can't really say that, but there is an attempt by Critical Stack to basically collate the blacklist in one case because they realize after our work that these guys aren't agreeing. And by the way, when we put the first report out, someone came along and said, they're not right. They can't be right. That was his entire presentation at a different conference. We heard about it afterwards. He said, they're absolutely not right. They can't be right. At the end, he was like, so guess what? They're right. And he was using a completely different data set than I was using. So there's no standard frame of reference in the internet. So in graph theory, when I build a graph from data, I expect that if I'm standing here at this vertex and I look around, I have the same kind of frame of reference as if I'm walking over to this one and I stand and I look around and I have the same view. That's why graph theory works so well. In the internet, it depends on how you build your graph as to what your frame of reference is. Is my data set the one I use from my router? Is the one I use from RIPE? Is the one I use from Route Views? Is the one I use from China, which I'm sure is completely different from everybody else? And this is my favorite slide. So what I told you is true from a certain point of view. The person who named this talk insisted I put the slide in here because it depends on your view of the internet as to what you see. So, questions? I'll even walk over with a microphone. Yeah, but we have a nice screen.
Yeah. How do the blacklists you've looked at handle signal decay? In other words, something is on the blacklist today should not be on the blacklist tomorrow, right? How does that factor into your analysis?
If you look in the first report, 300 pages, we broke things down by month. We didn't actually break things down day to day because that really gets nasty very, very quickly, especially if you're looking at long time. But I actually do have some of that data that showed up in a paper we did at WISCS, WISCS. The paper is also available in the on the SEI library. Yeah, well, we sliced and diced these suckers. I mean, in the first report you look at, we didn't just look at the contents of the list. I went to autonomous systems. I went to name servers. I went to MXs. I went and did data expansion, what we call indicator expansion. I said, okay, so you're finding this domain, and however you do it. And this domain has 5 IPs. So maybe you found this domain by finding one of these IPs and going to the domain and put it on your list. And somebody else did with a different IP. Well, that's not true either. I mean, we seriously sliced and diced these things. Any other questions? Well, I will be around. Ask if you have any.